good and quiet. Gee, Tofalcher of Clare, thank you all very much for coming out on a cold, windy night. Some of you are probably coming out from even colder and windier houses in the search of heat here. We have 21 people watching us from Trim, Idaho, Navan, Gippsland, Australia, and all sorts of places, and not quite as many in the room, about 19, I think, here in the room. This is our first Kilrush and District Historical Society lecture of 2025. Those of you listening from far-flung places may have heard that Ireland was hit by a very bad storm Éowyn last week, and many of us have been without power, water, internet, mobile service, heat, etc. for the last week here in Ireland. Thankfully, we all have our warm coats in a very cold building here tonight, and we have power and internet, and we're being watched from all over the world. Our speaker tonight is probably very well known to everyone in the room and to many of you watching on YouTube. Dr. Paul O'Brien from Mary Immaculate College in Limerick, native of Birmingham, if I dare say it, but came to Kilrush at a very young age and grew up in Kilrush and loves the history of Kilrush. Has been Secretary of Kilrush and District Historical Society since it was founded, and is a magnet for archives of all sorts. It's quite amazing how archives find him before he even goes out to try and find them. So he's going to talk to us tonight about building Liscrona, a 19th century holiday home in West Clare. And we've two very special guests down in the back row, Derek and Agnes Timmins, the current residents of Liscrona, who've been looking after it lovingly for many years and entertained Paul and myself royally there a year or two ago. So please give Paul O'Brien a big welcome.
Thanks, buddy. Okay, I gave this lecture already last summer to the Kilkee Heritage Trust. I think it was last July. I had just come off a plane from France, and it was quite a rushed lecture in a way. It's much meatier tonight, I think. There's lots more to it. Can you all hear me? Can you all hear me okay? So it'll take about 45 minutes, perhaps 50 minutes. I'm going to talk about how Liscrona, the beautiful house out in the head, how it came to be. I'll talk a little bit about this incredible archive that we discovered in Limerick about 2 years ago, and that we're slowly but surely getting through. I gave a lecture a week ago in Limerick on completely different topic in a way, again from this incredible lecture or incredible archive that we found. And I'd like to echo what Paddy said about Agnes and Derek being here this evening. We visited Liscrona perhaps 18 months ago at this stage, or 2 years ago, and we had delicious food and everything, and it was a lovely occasion. Okay, so this is the archive which we discovered about just over 2 years ago at this stage. So I do free walking tours of Limerick City in my spare time if I'm around, and I was doing one of O'Callaghan and Clancy Strand in the city, and we was focusing on the big houses of the North Strand and the North Circular Road in Limerick, and we stopped outside one of the houses, or two of the houses rather, and I said, I don't really know much about this house. I clearly hadn't spoken to Paddy, who knew lots of things about that house. However, there was a gentleman standing in the garden with a glass of wine, looking at all these onlookers staring over his garden wall at his house, and he sort of gave us a cheers. Long story short, he invited myself and Paddy down to look at his house a couple of weeks later. So Paddy, Randall Hodkinson and I went to visit the house, got the tour, etc. It was beautiful. It's a beautiful house. Met his son Nigel and Nigel's lovely wife Noreen. And Brendan said, I might have something in my own house on the North Circular that you might be interested in. So we popped down to the house a few weeks later, Randall Hodkinson and I, and into the attic space, and all of these boxes present themselves, if you like, to us. So we're slowly but surely working through the collection. Not all of the boxes are there. There's another 5 or 6. The date range of the collection is about 1550 right through to 1970. We are still working our way through all of the boxes. as I mentioned a moment ago, I did a lecture in Limerick last week, and I sort of focused on 2 boxes that I hadn't opened yet. So they're still giving up their secrets. But how did such a vast collection of estate papers come to be, and who created them? That's just some of the boxes there. You can see at the top left the Arthur estate, so the Arthur family of Limerick, of course, Arthur's Key and so forth. The next one in there, the MacDonnell estate, the one, of course, I'm going to talk about this evening, the Earl of Limerick, another Arthur one there, a Vereker one, and Westrop one there, the big Westrop house out in Mellon in West Limerick. So that's just a sample of the boxes. This is the gentleman who, I suppose, created the collection, if you like. His name was Robert Donogh O'Brien, son of the very famous William Smith O'Brien of Carramoyle House in County Limerick. Of course, cousins to the Inchiquins and Dromoland. And Robert Donogh O'Brien was a land steward, land agent, and he managed several estates. He managed estates all over Clare, Limerick, Tipperary, Cork, up as far as County Meath, County Antrim. So the collection itself really touches on most counties in Ireland. It's absolutely fascinating. I wish I didn't have to teach, because I would be in the collection all day, every day. Alas, I'm not quite there yet. But I found this photograph of him in his house, a beautiful house which he designed called Partina Lax, out in Partine in County Clare, just beyond Limerick City. The house is still extant, and I went to visit the house last year, and this photograph was on the wall. It was a real moment for me, because I'd been looking at his handwriting and his paperwork and everything else, but I didn't know what he looked like. So the house is still has come down the family, and it's still in the family. So it was great to visit. So what is in the archive? So just to give you an overview of what's there. So we have rental rolls, lease books, correspondence, estate maps and surveys, tenant records, business records. It covers the rural and urban estates, if you like, miscellaneous paperwork, and of course the winding up of many estates from, I suppose, the start of the Land Acts in the 1890s right through to 1922-25. And they're really detailed. So we have families who've enjoyed a great lifestyle, to, I suppose, experiencing boycotting and all of that political upheaval in their lives, particularly in the opening decades of the 20th century. However, I'm not going to discuss that this evening. That'll be a different lecture. So that's the collection overview, if you like. And within that collection, as I said, we have the MacDonnell, some of the MacDonnell papers, not all of them, but within there's 2 MacDonnell boxes. So within one of the MacDonnell boxes, we found all of the material related to Liscrona House, how it came to be, and all the very fine detail, builders' records, architects' records, etc., which I'm going to go through this evening in some detail. So, the architect of Liscrona House was a renowned gentleman known as James Payne. He designed countless buildings, including Dromoland Castle, the Dominican Church in Baker Place in Limerick City, the Thomond Bridge in Limerick as well, the Church of Ireland Chapel in Kilkee, and of course, the building we're in this evening, the former Church of Ireland building. He also designed that. So I got these drawings from the RCB in Dublin, and you can see this is his proposed north elevation of this very church, which of course was realised, and that's his signature there. So links all over the place, which is nice, I think. So just a note on James Payne himself. He was a noted architect and builder. He was born in Middlesex in 1779, and he and his younger brother, George Richards, with whom he went into business, were pupils of a very famous English architect, John Nash. Nash had designed Lough Cutra Castle up in County Galway, and he asked the two Payne brothers to superintend its building, which they duly did. George Richard went to Cork, and James went to Limerick eventually. So James continued in business as an architect and a builder in Limerick, and as I said, he was responsible for all of those buildings and more, which I had on the screen a moment ago. So he focused really on country houses, courthouses, jails and bridges, and almost his entire output is in the south and the west of Ireland. James lived, as you can see there a moment ago, to the great age of 98. And until the discovery of the R.D. O'Brien collection, it was thought that his last large-scale commission was the addition of a west wing to Napogue Castle in County Clare, just beside Quinn there. And his great work at Liscrona appears to have gone unrecorded. In any biography or entry I've read about Payne, Liscrona to date has not been included. He died in 1877 and was buried in the Vereker family vault in the churchyard of St. Mary's. Interestingly, for quite a wealthy man, he didn't make provision for his own vault or mausoleum in the churchyard. He was a widower at the time of his death and appears to have had no surviving children. In his will, he made bequests to numerous nieces and nephews in England and Ireland and to their children. His executors were to, quote, look over his library and portfolio of drawings and engravings and to distribute them amongst relatives or destroy them as they saw fit. And not a lot, I believe, has survived. His papers included drawings he submitted in 1836 for the Houses of Parliament at Westminster. His obituary in the Irish Builder described him as, quote, one of the oldest, if not the oldest, architect in the United Kingdom. So I presume at 97 he probably was. Okay, so let's move on to the MacDonnell family and who they were and what they achieved as in West Clare. So you can see this absolutely stunningly beautiful house in Newhall outside Ennis, quite close to Ballyea. It's described by the National Inventory of Architecture as a large mid-18th century and earlier brick two-storey with two bays on either side, topped by that very interesting balustrade there. The MacDonnell family were descended from the MacDonnell family of Dunluce, County Antrim. And indeed, in the O'Brien collection, we have a lot of the MacDonnell from County Antrim papers as well. In the 17th century, family members contracted a number of marriages with members of the O'Brien family of never pronounce that, is it Duach? Duach, close to the Hinch. Captain James MacDonnell of Kilkee was the second son of Daniel MacDonnell and Penelope, daughter of Tig O'Brien of Doag. Joe Power writes that in the late 17th century, he first supported the Jacobite side and then switched allegiance. The fortified estates of Viscount Clare were donated to a Dutchman, General Joost van Keppel, Earl of Albemarle. He was not interested in them and he sold them on. In fact, he sold over 30,000 acres to a syndicate of Francis Burton, James MacDonnell and Nicholas Wesby, or BMW, as somebody said to me before, in 1698. And James MacDonnell bought more land in the parishes of Inchy Cronin, Kilmurray Bricken and Dura from the Earl of Limerick, the Earl of Thomond rather, in 1713. And we have copies of all of that material from the late 17th and into the 18th century, detailing all the various townlands, conditions of sale and price and so forth. So MacDonnell built a house in the townland of Kilbreckan in the barony of Bunratty, upper, quite close to Quinn. Kilbreckan, I discovered in the last few days, was disposed of. The land around Kilbreckan was disposed of in 1856 through the encumbered estates. It also included Kilbreckan mines, which were first discovered in 1840, from which the MacDonnell family drew an additional large income. James MacDonnell died in 1714 and was succeeded by his son Charles James, who in 1728 married Elizabeth, only daughter of Christopher O'Brien of Ennistimon, and their only son Charles married Catherine O'Brien, third daughter of Sir Edward O'Brien of Dromoland. Their home at Kilbreckan was destroyed by fire in 1762, and no trace of it remains in the landscape. In 1764, they purchased lands in the parish of Cologne from Edward O'Brien of Ennistimon, including the house known as Newhall. And it's a really, really beautiful house, and I believe it's being restored at the moment. Charles MacDonnell died in 1773, aged 36. He and his wife had built the extension to Newhall. So originally Newhall was quite a long house, projecting this way, and I believe they built this extension here at the front. Certainly added to it. Joe Power said it is, quote, one of the finest examples of Georgian architecture in County Clare. It is a two-storey house with a pink brick facade, and the design is attributed to Francis Bindon. 2 generations later, the Armstrongs of Mount Heaton, County Offaly, succeeded to the MacDonnell estate. William Henry Armstrong having married a granddaughter of Charles MacDonnell in 1809. The second son of this marriage, William Edward Armstrong, succeeded his uncle John MacDonnell in 1850 and adopted the name MacDonnell in 1858, so just 2 years after Liscrona was built. In the 1870s, his estate amounted to about 6,500 acres in County Clare. So CRA MacDonnell sold about 3,500 acres and a further 256 acres to the Congested Districts Board in October 1912 for over £26,000. So a sizable sum of money. Okay, so we have photographs of the MacDonnells. These are in the Vandeleur photo collection held by Clare County Library. In respect to the MacDonnell material in the archive, the documents related to Liscrona are really the only ones I've had the chance to examine in-depthly. The material broadly consists of detailed building accounts for Liscrona, correspondence between Thomas Robert Griffin and his wife to MacDonnell, probate records for various members of the MacDonnell family, rental receipts, and so forth. Also included, as I mentioned a moment ago, are copies of the articles of agreement between MacDonnell and Thomas Amory, dated the 22nd of July, 1702. They look like they were printed yesterday. They're in such good condition. Okay, so let's have a look at Liscrona. So these are the copies of the articles of agreement for chopping up the land or for purchasing the land more kindly in West Clare from the Earl of Thomond between MacDonnell, Wesby and Burton. And they are absolutely fascinating documents, and I could do an article, a lecture just on those alone. So let's have a look at the location of Liscrona. So this is the modern map, if you like, and you can see it marked there, Liscrona. Let's just zoom in a little bit. I have to say, when Paddy and I visited your home that time, the view is it's breathtaking. I know when people describe house situations and everything else, particularly maybe auctioneers using very flowery language to sell something, it all applies to the position of Liscrona. It's absolutely stunning. So they needed to identify a site in their land. So this is the 1839, give or take, Ordnance Survey map. And as you can see, Liscrona is built about here. And if we zoom in to about 1890. You can see the house is upright and has been built and occupies this beautiful location here with unparalleled views across the mouth of the estuary over to County Kerry. And let's zoom in a little bit more. So that's the parcel of land in about 1839. And this is the house upright in 1890. So you can see, I mean, it's probably the best location in West Clare for a house because nobody is ever going to build in front of you. So it's really, really stunning. Okay, so just have a quick look there at Griffith's valuation from 1855. So we can see the land, the townland of Liscrona. The landlord is William Armstrong, and some of the tenant names included O'Dea, Murray, Dwyer, Shea, McMahon, Kelly, Heatherman, Collins, Hawke, I presume, Quealy, Keating, Ayres, Clancy, and McGinn. And we'll see some of those names represented in the documents as we go forward. Additional occupations for some of the people involved or some of the tenants on the land, councillor, carpenter, farmer and smith. And those occupations were certainly put to good use during the building of Liscrona. The total valuation of the townland was just over £478, and Liscrona was probably built just post Griffith's valuation, as £1 is the highest house valuation in the land at that time. So let's have a look at some of the Liscrona building accounts. So the material is absolutely fascinating, as you'll see when I zoom in a moment. The hand is so easy to read. Often when I work in old archives, you might be lucky if you can read one foolscap in a day and understand it, because the handwriting can be very difficult to read. So this is a summary of Liscrona building, the Liscrona building accounts dated the 12th of October 1856. And I'll just read it in case you can't read it there. So William Blair, Charles MacDonnell, James McInerney are mentioned. James Nelson was paid for timber and carriage of same, just over £211. Henry Ellis, per Mr. M. Fitzgerald, who's the builder of the house, was paid £56. Pat Cusick was paid, of Kilkee, was paid £18. Ryan and Brothers Kilkee for sheet lead were paid £49. Walter Burke of Dublin for the window glass for Liscrona was paid £36, just over. And James Harvey for cement was paid 16 shillings. Some of these names may be very familiar with people here today and also people listening online. I suspect that the Pat Cusick mentioned might just be the same stonemason who also carved some of the finest headstones in graveyards throughout West Clare and indeed here in the churchyard. Some of the other suppliers advertised heavily in newspapers in Limerick and Dublin, so I was able to chase them through the newspapers. So I mentioned Walter Burke for the plate glass. So this advert appeared in the Freeman's Journal on the 9th of November 1859. Plate glass, pier and chimney glasses of the largest dimensions, silvered, and of all sizes silvered and unsilvered, for mirrors, sashes and shop fronts, crown and cheek glass, with every description of window and horticultural glass, cut to any size and in any quantity on the shortest of notice. So the order went in to Walter Burke in Dublin, and there was no horror stories, I'm sure. It was safely transported down to West Clare and installed in Liscrona, and I believe it's probably the original glass still in the house, perhaps. So that was quite a feat. I mentioned Harvey, who supplied the cement. So we have James Harvey and Co. are now discharging the exit ship Primrose, a cargo of timber, deals, staves, and so on. Harvey and Co. as usual are well supplied with Bangor and Killaloose slates, sheet and pipe lead, Roman cement, plaster of Paris, fire and Bridgewater tiles and bricks, and many other articles in the building line. So, and one final one there. So for, I mentioned Frederick George Bashford. He supplied a lot of the chimney pieces and the marble, as we'll see as we'll go forward. So you can find them in the building accounts, you can chase them to the newspapers, and it's just it's just great to see the different layers of source material. So the master builder was a guy called Maurice Fitzgerald of Ennis, and he was the main building contractor, we might describe him as today. By the end of the project, he had been paid the sum of just over £726 for finishing what he described in the paperwork as Liscrona Lodge, and that's about £43,000 in today's money. So I went looking for Fitzgerald, and I discovered this from 1860. The new church of St. Mary's at Cree, the design of Mr. Maurice Fitzgerald, is hastening fast to completion. It stands on the site of the Chapel of Ease, perhaps, which the late Father Pat Kelly, etc., built at his own expense for the convenience of that remote part of the parish. And indeed, it was large enough for that purpose. And he was prolific. Here he is in 1863. Tenders will be received to the office of Maurice Fitzgerald for building an addition to Ennis-Simon House, of course, the O'Brien House, which is now the Falls Hotel, if I'm correct. Okay. And the Dictionary of Irish Architects tell us that Maurice Fitzgerald was an architect of Ennis, County Clare, and he was active in the 1850s and 60s and into the 1870s. He appears in several trade directories of the time, including Slater's and Coughlin's. He was the architect of the Convent of Mercy in Arthur Row in Ennis, and his office was located on the same street. The Clare Journal, July 1860, records the marriage of Fitzgerald's eldest daughter, Ellen, to John Torpey. Fitzgerald's output was prolific, and indeed his name crops up in countless building projects from about 1851 to about 1868. He died from liver disease in 1874. In 1844, he had submitted plans to alter and enlarge the courthouse in Ennis at a cost of £2,500. So an interesting guy, no doubt. So, like all big houses, it needs a farm to help sustain itself. So Liscrona Farm, we have the records for Liscrona Farm. This was the site of the farm, as you can see, just beyond the house there. And if we zoom in, not a huge farm by any standards, but certainly adequate enough to service the house. If we look, this is the imprint of the farm, which if we go back, you can just see it's still on the land. I like this. Buildings in the landscape are like fingerprints. Every time our ancestors introduced something into the natural landscape, such as a fort or a village or a farm, they literally imprinted themselves into it. And I got this from, I got the photograph, as you can see there, from the Ordnance Survey. And when the weather is particularly hot, as we know, these imprints sort of come to life, and you can see them very clearly in the landscape. The accounts related to the building of the farm include payments in respect of temporary farm offices, levelling old fences and dredging, stoning pasture and tillage lands, the erection of the road from the estate bounds near Walsh's home to Clancy's Lands, new fence in front of the house at the Shannon, the sowing of seeds, including rye, grass, hay, barley and oats, ploughing, lime kiln and lime, bog drainage, herding, taxes on land, including Knockrow, Corbally and Tuna farms, and drawing stones from Kilkee Quarry. So let's go forward. So there's also several receipts for wages paid. So this is just one example I said I would put up. So this is for haymaking and mowing at Liscrona in 1895, and it was paid to a chap called Tim Hanrahan. As you can see there from the very top, received from C.R.A. MacDonnell Esquire the sum of £9, 19 shillings and no pence, in full due to me for haymaking and mowing at Liscrona Domain in 1895. And it was paid there on the 11th of October 1895 to Thomas Hanrahan, and we can see that his mark, he was illiterate, so we can see the X on his mark there. So there's lots of these receipts, and again, rather than just being dry building accounts, as we know, particularly Paddy here, when you're looking for clues as to genealogy and family history, you can put people in time and places with a lot of these records. So this is a summary of the Liscrona farm accounts from the 14th of March to the 30th of May, 1857. So we have paving, so temporary farm offices, levelling old fences, Clancy's lands, new fence to Shannon, this is the list I just read a moment ago, and you can see the costs involved. The taxes are quite low there at £1 and 16 shillings. Ploughing and harvesting, I think. Incidentals, harrowing. Incidentals, lime kiln, lime, and so forth. Absolutely every penny of expenditure is accounted for. The accounts, as far as I can see, are perfect. So what else do we have? This is the return of work on Full Farm, November 1856 to March 1857. So we have farm offices, and also to include whitewashing Barry's house, fences, ploughing and harrowing, seeds, taxes, herding, Kilkee Quarry, taxes at Corbally, levelling and so forth, and taxes again. And the hand, as I say, it's just beautiful to read. These are the suppliers and the workmen. I'm going to look at these in a little more depth. So these are the ones I've pulled out. So we have Mr. Sheehan at Killaloe for marble works for 2 white marble shields of arms at Liscrona, at a cost of £10 and 15 shillings. We have James Hogg, even though it's crossed off there, to James Lampley, I think, of Limerick. The amount of the account for a marble chimney piece for Liscrona and also the drawing rooms at 4 and 10, I think there. And Manus Hedeman per Dwyer for a heap of stones for Liscrona building. Michael, who's that? Michael's great-grandfather. So great to have those records. If we'll just look a little bit more at James Hogg in 1850, if you know Burger King in Limerick City, that was James Hogg's store right there in the corner. James Hogg has received from Killaloe Marble Works a large addition to his stock of Italian and Irish marble chimney pieces suitable for dining rooms, drawing rooms and bedrooms. Also some beautiful specimens of Irish marble in busts, columns, baptismal fonts, and a large assortment of new pattern register grates and bronze and Berlin black fenders have just come to hand. And the Killaloe Marble Works, which feature a lot in the Liscrona building accounts. Sheehan and Croshy beg to inform their friends. They had taken over Killaloe Marble Works, and they're, I suppose, assuring their large customer base that things will carry on as normal. So a lot of some of the material for the house came from locally. Some came, such as Kilkee Quarry, some came from Limerick and some came from Dublin. But I mean, this is really high quality, high class stuff. Even though it was only ever to be their holiday home or their holiday lodge, they were really kitting out the house in the best of material. And this is 1855, 1856. So this is on the back of the famine, if you like. So that's the wider context of what's going on. So this house erecting on that beautiful site must have been a sight to behold for the locals. But it also employed a number of the locals and gave them work at a time of, I'm sure, of economic depression. So that's a good thing, I guess. Okay, so that was James Hogg's store just there. If you're familiar, that's now the entrance to Arthur's Quay. That's sadly a Burger King, and you can see the ship there at Arthur's Quay in the centre. And this is, again, from the Liscrona material, from that very shop there, bought of James Hogg and so I think it's a deeds. It is actually, it's the deeds box, would you believe? So the box that the material is held in, the square box we saw it at the beginning, was I couldn't read that earlier. We now know came from James Hogg's hardware shop in Limerick. So, as I was saying a moment ago, absolutely every detail is recorded in the house, or in the house boxes. Okay, so what else do we have? A few more bits and pieces. So Harrison Lee, the foundry in Limerick City, for the metal railings for the hall, the door and the terrace, as we can see there. Still extant, thankfully. That cost £10 and 15 shillings. The cost of the front entrance gate, the building piers, the walls of the style and the walls of same, and fixing a curb to the hall doorsteps, railing to same, and the balustrade for the area cost £25. Again, this is 1855-56. And Thomas Nash, the carpenter for the storm shutters made in 1866 and installed, I guess, was paid £13.09. So again, we get an indication of wages being paid to skilled trades people at the time. So that's always very interesting. The Liscrona domain, as we go forward into the 1870s, some of the tenants. So we have a William Dwyer in Cloverfield, Michael Keating in Ayersfield, John Kelly in Clancy's, John Lahive in Glasheenfield, Michael Turberty in the entrance field, and also in Hillfield, Pat Cahill in Fort Field, Francis O'Keefe in the Bog, James Lahive also Bog, the late something Roach, the late widow Roach, Michael Stack, and in the bottom field, I think it says McInerney. So we have a full list of all the tenants, how long we can trace how long they were there, because we have all the rental material and books, the size of their holding, the rate per acre, and their yearly rent. So again, these type of records don't really come up in any great number. We might get a couple of sheets here and there, but straight through from 1856 right through to about 1900, an unbroken record is quite rare. So these photographs, thanks to Agnes and Derek, they supplied the photographs of their beautiful home. This is a description from 1861. The house contained an entrance hall, a lounge hall, 5 bedrooms, a dressing room, a drawing room, a dining room, servants' rooms, basement, stabling, coach houses, avenue, and of course, unparalleled views of the estuary across the Shannon to County Kerry. Just another view of the house, showing a different aspect. And you can see there the 2 shields of arms that were mentioned, that came from Killaloe. And another photograph there of the house. I think that's someone on the drone, actually. Is this in the front garden there? And the interior of the house. And the basement. And beautifully restored. Designed the two elevations, the front, the entrance elevation, and the seaside elevation as it's described in the records. So just a little more about the house. In addition to the insights provided by the choice of crops and farm practices at Liscrona, we also know that Mr. Crawley was paid £6 for levelling terraces at the gardens. Edward Rounds, George Orange, Seymour and Co. for painting and hanging the wallpaper at Liscrona. They were paid £138. James Hogg features again. He was paid £13 for bell hanging in the house. Anthony Dwyer was for limestone and freight of same from Limerick to Carrigaholt was paid £13 and 17 shillings for that. Hines and Stack were paid 10 shillings for setting the grate, I think, at Liscrona entrance. And as I said, just to repeat, you can see the two shields of arms here and here. Excuse me. Sheehan of the Kilrush Marble Works was paid £10 and 15 shillings for those shields. Again, I just pulled out the names of other tradesmen in the collection. So we have William Dixon. He was a plumber. He installed a water closet and a pump at a cost of £42. James Lysett was paid £1 and 11 shillings for sawing mahogany for the house. M. Cronin was paid £1 for setting the tiles in the porch. Dennis Leahy, John Daly, and Michael Hines were also paid a labouring wage as well, although the figure isn't there. So the summary of works for the entire project. So excavation cost £25. All the mason work, all the stone work cost £64. The carpentry work cost £44. The stone cutter work, £74. The timber sawyers were paid £22. All the smiths work cost £8. The manual labour, including making mortar and so forth, those guys were paid £30. Quarrying stones and bringing them from the quarry, £43. Quarrying stones at Kilkee Quarry and superintendence of same, £66. The sand cost £3. The lime cost £9, and iron, it just says on its own, £2, 5 shillings and 1 pence. So the entire records, and nearly there. Timber and carriage, £126, £120 rather. Carriage of lime, sand, and timber, £21. Sundries quite low at £1.7 and 4. And the clerk of the works was paid £28 for his services. So let me see. Liscrona is described. I asked an architect friend to describe it for me, seeing that it's not in the NIAH and it's certainly not in James Payne's any books about him. So my friend described it as, Liscrona is a moderately sized one-storey over part basement country house overlooking the Shannon estuary. It is constructed of finely cut limestone ashlar with 2 white marble plaques on the gables. The house is approached from the upper level with a flight of limestone steps and iron railings leading to an arch porch and a recessed front door. The south elevation, overlooking the estuary, has double height projecting bay windows to capture the beautiful surroundings. The house features a hipped roof with natural slate and clay ridge tiles. There are 3 chimney stacks, we'll get back to those in a moment, with terracotta pots. All the windows are sashed, mostly having 2 over 2 panes of glass windows. Outbuildings to the north of the house with enclosed wall garden. Following the completion of Liscrona, other members of the landed gentry announced their intention to build holiday cottages and lodges in the vicinity. including Miss Manus has taken a site for the erection of 2 lodges at Liscrona from Major MacDonnell DL. William Smith O'Brien, and here we are talking about his son, R.D. O'Brien's collection of papers. William Smith O'Brien Esquire has taken a site for a marina residence at Liscrona on the estate of Major Armstrong MacDonnell. And Major MacDonnell Newhall has given down his name for £1,000 towards the erection of a hotel in Kilkee on the style of the Gresham's commodious establishment in Kingstown. So he seems to have been a bit of a trendsetter. And again, just fashionables arrivals to Kilkee. I'm sure this happens every year. The Earl of Limerick and family, Major and the Honourable Mrs. MacDonnell, the Honourable Charlotte O'Brien, I presume that should be, to Liscrona near Kilkee, and various other notables of the day going to Kilkee on their, well, not quite their summer holidays, their October holidays. I guess they didn't work. Okay. So there is a little bit of scandal associated with the house. Houses like Liscrona were often rented out to paying guests if the owners were not visiting for a season. Are we okay for time? If the owners were not visiting for the season. Post 1893, it appears that the MacDonnells appear to have stayed at Liscrona less frequently, and notices in the society columns of contemporary contemporary newspapers are difficult to find. Previously to that, they're there every summer. It's recorded in the local and in the Limerick newspapers. This may have been, this is sort of guesswork on my part, this may have been related to a high-profile divorce scandal that engulfed the family in 1893. Alice Catherine Lawless Burton Cunningham was the daughter of Henry Stewart Burton Cunningham of Carrigaholt Castle. She married Count Gustav Leon Albert de Hamel de Manon on the 6th of November 1879. They lived in London. She and her husband were divorced in 1893. She had committed, and I'm using the language from the time, she had committed adultery with Charles MacDonnell on 2 occasions when she visited Kilkee without her husband. Now, of course, like everybody likes a bit of gossip, it's reported in the newspapers. So, romantic end of a romantic marriage. I'm sure that was tongue-in-cheek. Count de Manin, a gentleman who came over to this country with his father many years ago and has lived here ever since, petitioned Judge Barnes on Saturday in the divorce court for the dissolution of his marriage with an Irish lady whose name was Alice Kathleen Burton, on the ground of her misconduct with Mr. Charles MacDonnell, a landed proprietor living at Newhall, Liscrona, County Clare, an estate adjoining that of the respondent's brother at Carrigaholt. The parties were married at St. George's, Hanover Square in 1879 and lived at Kensington and elsewhere. The misconduct took place in 1892 while the respondent was on a visit to her brother, accompanied only by her maid. And this is a report from the divorce court. The Countess was very much agitated, and the Count allowed her to remain in the house until she was able to be removed. Mr. MacDonnell first denied the accusation, but when he found that the lady had confessed, and after being served with the citation, he wrote the petitioner the following letter. Newhall, Liscrona, County Clare, November 1892. Sir, I beg to inform you that I am guilty of the charge in respect of which you have commenced the action against me. I do not ask you to pardon the wrong I have done, as I am aware that in such a case there can be none. He's owning up. I am sincerely sorry for what has occurred, and I assure you that I am the only person to blame in the matter, and I am willing and anxious to do anything possible to make amends for what I have done. And one more slide there. On Saturday, Mr. Justice Barnes granted a green IC for the divorce of Count de Man, a French gentleman domiciled in England on the ground of his wife's misconduct with Mr. Charles MacDonnell of the county of Clare. And I believe it was her lady's maid who carried the stories back. So that's sort of, I mean, that's 1890, 95, 96. thereafter, the MacDonnell family, as far as I can tell, they don't really ever live at the house again. It's rented out to, we'll see in a moment, 1 or 2 people, and then the Griffin family moved in for a considerable period of time. So this gentleman here, Major Jemison MP for West Clare, who was great friends actually with the Glynn family in Kilrush, has taken Liscrona, Kilkee on a lease from Mr. Charles MacDonnell Armstrong. It is beautifully situated on the Shannon between Kilrush and Lough Cutra. And there's a photograph of him looking very dapper. And an inventory was prepared, apologies for the creases, an inventory was prepared before Jemison moved in, and the list is every single item in the house, in all of the rooms. So we have a dining room, drawing room, bedrooms, hall, outer hall, dressing room, bedrooms. In the basement we have a kitchen, office, servants' room, scullery, pantry and landings. So I'll just read some of the items. The drawing room, 2 cabinets, 2 small tables, 2 screens, a lounge, 3 chairs, lamp and standard. In the dining room, dining table, round table, side table, shelf, and so forth. And of course, this is late Victorian times, so the rooms and everything is, personally for me, I'm sort of less is more, but as we know, in Victorian times, absolutely everything was shoved into rooms, and you can just imagine the room, I'm sure, with beautiful plants and everything, very long curtains to keep out winds such as that we experienced the other night. So the next person to move into and take up residence was Thomas Robert Griffin. He was a civil engineer. According to the 1911 census, he was born in County Clare in 1860 or 1861. He was an assistant county surveyor for County Clare between about 1915 until 1922. Possibly held the position from early 1903. And he was responsible for bringing the water supply to Kilkee in County Clare. At the time of the 1911 census, he had been married to his wife, Annabella née Kane, for 11 years, and they had a daughter, Dorothy, and a son, Morris. Griffin's correspondence with MacDonnell, I think he was the land agent for MacDonnell, typically revolved around managing the farm at Liscrona, the price of livestock. The terrible weather features an awful lot in the letters, and arranging visits to the house by MacDonnell, the owner. The letters are fascinating and would make for a great lecture in their own right. So Thomas Griffin, as you can see there, quite a stern or stoic looking gentleman. These photographs came from Katrina Vincent in Australia. Who's watching? Hello, Katrina. Hope I'm doing it justice. I'll just flip forward for a moment. These are some of the letters. There's many, many letters. I think over 125 letters in total. And as you can see, they're in absolutely perfect condition. So he wanted to buy the house. MacDonnell wanted to sell it. MacDonnell offered him Liscrona for £3,000 in 1900, but he refused to buy it. That's Griffin. I cannot see a way to purchase at £3,000, taking into consideration all the work which is necessary to put the place in proper order. The fields are becoming overrun with brambles, which will have to be dug out. I have had them cut down once, but they are nearly as bad again. The garden too is most disheartening. I will have spent £30 on it, and I'm afraid I need not expect £10 worth of crop, and I have not even the satisfaction of seeing any improvement. In many ways, the place suits me very well, and would certainly like to buy it at what I consider its value to me. Failing to do so, I hope to return it in a somewhat improved condition. And this negotiation goes on for about I'd say over perhaps 18 months or thereabouts, and there's letters back and forth, and they're discussing. It's all very polite and formal, of course. And that's Thomas Robert Griffin's signature there from one of the letters. So, as I said, just an example of the correspondence, obviously written to MacDonnell by Thomas Griffin in Liscrona and Kilkea and Liscrona headed paper. The telegraphic address is just Carrigaholt. And as you can see there, Griffin had a lovely hand as well, thankfully. So Thomas Griffin died in 1926. Found this in the Nina Guardian. Mr. Thomas R. Griffin, Liscrona Kilkea, Assistant County Surveyor, met with a serious accident in Kilrush on Tuesday evening. Mr. Griffin, accompanied by other members of his family, came to Kilrush on business in his motor car. Preparing to return, he stooped down in front of the car to start the engine, when the car suddenly started, striking him on the head and knocking him onto the road. The car passed over his body, inflicting injuries, as a result of which he was removed to St. Joseph's Hospital, where he died on Thursday. So he met a terrible death in 1926. So his wife, Mrs. Annabella Griffin, died the 6th of March, 1962, and is buried in Greystones, County Wicklow. His son, Morris, F.H. Griffin, or AMC, died in 1936, aged 31 years, and he's also buried in Greystones in County Wicklow. A few years ago, Margaret Walsh alerted me to Dorothy Griffin's account in Mal Bellaire's wonderful account of his life, and of course his life and times in Liscrona with his family. I misplaced it, reprinted it hastily over 10 years and gave it back to Margaret. And quite recently, Brian Glynn, I hope he's listening, Brian Glynn reminded me of it again, and I read it, and it's such a beautiful account of growing up in Liscrona. I'm going to read some short excerpts from it now. So Dorothy recalled many fond memories from her childhood in a 1978, I suppose I would call it an oral history, with Mal Bellairs. He included, and we'll come to Bellairs in a moment, he included Dorothy's account in his 1997 manuscript, and Mal annotated her account in places. So, in Dorothy's words, the grand old grey cut-stone manor house was built in the 1840s by a family named MacDonnell. Liscrona was their summer home. The family came from Newhall near Ennis, and MacDonnell is reported to be a descendant of the Earls of Antrim. The MacDonnell family's crest is on the south side of Liscrona. The Griffin crest is on the east side over the main entrance. The stone for the house was brought from a quarry near Ennis. The family at one time owned over 2,000 acres of land from Carrigaholt all the way to Quern. There were two entrance roads. The one that used to go up north of the house, past the stable area, which you saw earlier, and onto the Dunaha Road. Dorothy's family, the Griffins, were all Protestant. They were one of the landlords who were very rough on the Irish peasants, and I think this is Mal annotating it. Many of the landlords' homes extending out to Loop Head were burned in the Troubles, but Liscrona was spared. One interesting note is that when Dorothy visited, she saw the Irish flag that we fly. She was dismayed, to say the very least. The old wounds and scars were still there on both sides. So Dorothy's account goes on. She calls it the Griffin era, 1898 to about 1932. Excuse me. About 1898, my father, Thomas Robert Griffin, came back to Ireland from Australia, hoping to make a living by engineering. He could only get employment as assistant county surveyor to the West Clare County Council. Having married my mother, he rented Liscrona. There was a lot of land attached, farm buildings and stables, etc. There was a back avenue up to these buildings which led into a lane, and from it the main Dunaha Carrigaholt Road. My father had horses, cattle, sheep and fowl, and killed his own meat. We had a bog and all our own vegetables, we were practically self-supporting. Liscrona, he employed about 6 men, 4 of whom were permanent members of staff. At the time of my birth in 1902, Liscrona was very prosperous and beautifully kept, with a lovely lawn in front and at the side of the house. The house was probably built the same time as Dromoland Castle. It was built in about 1838, so she was a little bit off. The same architect, I believe, was responsible for both buildings. It was quite an old house when my parents were there. My father did very little to the house, as his interests were outdoors. My mother took great pride in polishing the lovely oak floors. We had 2 greenhouses and grew grapes and tomatoes to market in Kilkee. There was a tennis court to the left of the wood, surrounded by meadow and tennis balls, which were always getting lost in the high grass. About 1912, my father bought Liscrona outright from Mr. MacDonnell and employed a person to rub out the MacDonnell crest and coat of arms and chisel in our own instead. It cost about £20, which my mother thought was a shocking waste of money. When Liscrona was first built, labourers got 6p per week, the coppers being thrown up to them from the windows. On one occasion, as a great joke, the coppers were heated in the fire before being thrown out, and when the men grabbed them, they yelled with pain. Liscrona was very damp in the early days. It was obviously built over a spring, as there was a deep well in the yard where the water was pumped from daily. Now, no doubt, there was an electric pump. Except for pushing tiled fireplaces in the living rooms, we did not do much else to the house. The 1914 war changed life at Liscrona for the worst. Money was short and labour was hard to get both indoors and out. The troubles that followed also affected us. The great beauty of Liscrona was the unique big chimneys. Each chimney was really 6 small ones placed so close together that they had the appearance of one chimney. They were made of the same stone as the house. One of the recent owners had these lovely chimneys removed, as he said they had become dangerous, but it is thought locally that all he really wanted was the lead around them, which was then fetching very high prices. Their disappearance has really spoiled the appearance of the house. Everything changed after the 1914 war. The Land Commission took over our land, only leaving us with 40 acres. And the Land Commission records are still sealed in Dublin, and there's been various attempts over the years to open them. They're quite contentious records, as you can imagine. But we have all the Land Commission records for Liscrona in that area, which are very, very interesting. After this, the Long Avenue was no longer ours exclusively, and instead of the fields at each side of it belonging to us, they were divided amongst farmers, and hedges were put up on each side of the drive to the house. Consequently, the drive became very wet and muddy because no longer would the north wind keep it dry, and all the farm carts using it made it very rough, and no one was responsible for its upkeep. We still had the yard and 2 men. Mother kept the place on for as long as she could, and in about 1932, she sold it to Mr. McLaughlin for, I think, about £600. He looked after it well and loved it dearly until old age made it impossible for him to carry on. After he sold it, Liscrona fell on very hard times, eventually becoming a hotel. A big bar was put in and the rooms were divided up to make this possible, and there are now about 9 bedrooms upstairs instead of the original 4. And that's just an abridged version of Dorothy Tweedy, née Griffin's account growing up in the house. And she wrote that in 1978. So let's go back to our nice slideshow. So the list of owners in the 20th century, and thanks again to Derek and Agnes for sharing some material with me. So Thomas Robert Griffin from about 1900 to 1932, Robert Boyd McLaughlin, 1932 to 1953. He seems to be have been a gifted scholar, and I have found him in the records in whatever they're calling it these days, NUIG, UCG, University of Galway, but he won several scholarships while he was studying in UCG. Michael F. Nolan and Essie Lillis Nolan were in the house from about 1953 to 1955. Colonel James Hannon, 55 to 65. James Henry Leonard Lloyd, 1965 to 68. Edward or Ted C. Kavanagh, 68 to 71, and he applied for a publican's license, which I found in the newspapers. It was offered for sale in 1970 and had been in use with a guest house with 11 bedrooms. George and Marge Klein and Malcolm and Joe Bellairs were there from about 71 to 79, and then Malcolm and Maria Bellairs were there from 79 to about 95. Tobias and Petra Eichmuller purchased, I think, in 96, and Agnes and Derek Timmons purchased in 2012, and I hope that date is right. Let's have a look. This is from 1970, Liscrona House near Kilkee, situated in own spacious grounds on the banks of the Shannon, overlooking the vast sylvan-framed Atlantic, backed by a vista of the hills of Kerry. We offer guest-controlled central heating throughout. We could do it in here tonight. Hot and cold, licensed bar, own private beach and bathing, 3 minutes walk from the house. Good food, comfort, and a welcome awaits you at Liscrona House, which is open all year round. 14 guineas per week, no cover charge, and the telephone number. These are sale notices which were in the Irish Times, I think, in 1953, and we get a description of the house, the conditions of sale, and some of the rooms, the furniture contained therein, hall, dining room, drawing room, bedroom furniture. You can see it there yourselves, everything you'd expect in a house like this. So this is when R.B. McLaughlin was selling it in 53. And this beautiful photograph came from Mal Bellairs' account, 1997 account. And I think Dorothy's description of it as the old grey beauty with her original chimneys, also called Our Grey Lady. She obviously had a lot of affection for the house. So the fate of Liscrona House, as I said, we looked through it. Thankfully, it was purchased by Agnes and Derek, and they embarked on a painstaking restoration of the property. And as I said last year, or thereabouts, Paddy and I visited. Thanks to Agnes and Derek for their kind invitation to visit their 168-year-old forgotten James Payne masterpiece, which will now be added to the collection to the James Payne catalogue. And there's a lot of James Payne fans who are quite excited by that. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Trying to get my microphone up and running for those listening to us. Has anyone in the room any questions for Paul? If you have, I'll ask Paul Gleeson maybe to take this roving mic so that the people listening on YouTube can hear you.
Thank you very much, Paddy. Anyone wants a question?
Wait for the mic, Martha, please.
Were any of the other houses that were applied for ever built near the house?
I don't think so. I could find no evidence of any of William Smith O'Brien or anyone else building big houses. They might have had houses in Kilkee, but they didn't build them back there.
I was watching Nationwide there a couple of weeks ago, and they were on about Templemore. It was built around the same time as Kilrush, around 1820. And historians found they were showing the Griffith valuation, the maps, and it said they were held above in the National Gallery in Dublin. And there was a book with every map giving more information of all the tenants. So it had to be very interesting to get that information.
That'd be a great source. Yeah. Thanks, Vin.
Anybody else? Michael.
Michael O'Connell with the question.
No, just
A long comment.
if you want to see the stone, the buildings, the farm buildings were a bit away from the house itself, and they were knocked in 1969. His local farmer had taken over, and he was using the stone. It was an enclosed yard, you know, very sort of old style, modern sort of farm place. But the only stone that's left of those buildings can be seen now in the Co-op building in Carrickholt in the square.
Thanks, Michael.
Carrickholt, where the fishing used to take place.
It's just another interesting observation, considering we're coming out of a storm. The fact that the building was built with hip roofs, you know, rather than gables or, you know, so they were even kind of aware of the gales.
As beautiful as it is, I'm sure it's quite exposed in a way.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anybody else want to say anything else? Lisa.
I just wondered, did we find out how much the Griffins actually paid for it in the end when they bought it in 1900? Did it come down from 3,000?
I didn't check, but I think it was in around 3,000. I don't think it came down on much.
So they lost 2.5
Mm.
2,400 because they only sold it for 600.
Yeah.
So, do you want to say something about that?
Around 1965, who was the holder in 1965? What was his name? There was a tenant in it in 63, and then there was another one in 65. Kavanagh was there afterwards. That was around 1970.
Hannon, was it? Colonel James Hannon was there till 65.
Well,
Or from
around that
65.
time, we got an order for a cooker and a fridge and a television to be delivered to the Liscrona House.
Oh, interesting.
And I did the delivery. And on the way going in, there was a security. I had to be vetted before I was let in. And then when I got to the door of the house, I was vetted again, and I was just let inside the door to make the delivery. But I did observe what was going on. They were collecting stamps. Now, I don't know whether it was connected with the Shanahan stamps auctions scam or not, but the house was absolutely chock-a-block with stamps from all over the world, because they were on the floors, and there was 4 or 5 of those big post office, those big white bags full of stamps there as well. Now, I believe that they were supposed to have 60% of the world's US stamps at the time, and that they were selling them in Shanahan auctions. And the only gentleman that I met he was about 5'10", and he was squat, with a very, he had a mature beard. I can't remember if he wasn't bald, but he was very abrupt with me, and just said, "What do I owe you?" And he paid me the money, and I was practically ordered to leave.
Wow.
Whatever was going on,
It's really interesting.
they didn't want the general public to know about it.
So that's another scandal for Paul to
100 years later.
to investigate.
Thanks,
Yes.
Michael, for that. That's interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Easy to tie down.
Okay. So you didn't find any stamps underneath the floorboards, did you? Yeah. Any? A penny black or something like that. Or, yeah. One with slightly, you know, isn't completely perfect. You know, one of those rarer ones that. No. Okay.
Can I ask if anyone visited the house when it was a guest house, or did anyone know the Bel Airs, or Michael, you did?
I was there when Bel Air had it.
Okay.
They were lovely people, the Bel Airs. They were very open and welcome to the locals. And I think most people living in the area at the time who were interested have been to the house, you know. So I can't say the same about the rest. The next lot in after Beliers were German, and they wanted nobody out, nobody in there. They were really more or less had security and all there. Yeah, just they even wanted to close. They wanted to close off Glasheen Beach, and that's a lovely beach just next door to the house, and they wanted to try to make that private. Didn't last too long. That's 90s.
Sure. You.
Armstrong stand up bit there. On the headed paper's address was down as New Hall, Liscrona.
Yeah.
How comes? I mean,
Just-
that's the two places rather than one.
Perhaps he considered Liscrona as part of his greater New Hall estate. That's the only thing I can think of. What do you think, Billy?
Or did they refer to Liscrona also as New Hall?
Well, that's the only bit we've seen of that. So I'm just wondering.
Looked to me as if they were referring to the house in Liscrona as New Hall,
New
and
Hall, yeah.
Liscrona was the townland.
Even though he wasn't talking about New Hall in Enniston, was he?
It's hard to know.
Hard to know.
Because I suppose the house was only really occupied once the Griffins moved into it. So effectively, it was just a house in Liscrona.
They were only there for the season.
So the house mightn't have been as such named by the Armstrong MacDonnells. It might have been the Griffins that started to call it Liscrona House.
Hard to know. Hard to know.
You finished? Okay.
Okay, thank you all very much. Apologies to those watching online. I tried to put up Mal Belair's text as Paul was reading it, and I didn't realize it was going out online as I was scrolling up and down trying to find where Paul was reading from. We've had a few nice compliments from those watching online, but no questions. Paul answered all the questions in his original talk. And it just remains for me to remind those of you here and those of us watching online, we're back in 4 weeks' time. If I can find the right email with the details. Dr. Catherine Porter from the University of Limerick will be talking to us about Mapping Ireland Ordnance Survey Digital Heritage. We saw lots of nice maps from Paul tonight, and we learned a lot more about the history of mapping in Ireland from Catherine. Our chairperson, Lisa O'Sullivan, down the back is reminding those in the room, if you haven't already bought our book, Kilrush, Memories of an Irish Market Town, they're almost sold out. The print run of 1,000 is nearly gone. And your 2025 Down Memory Lane calendar is also still on sale at just €10. So a big round of applause, please, for Paul. Thank you all for coming out on a cold night. See you in a month's time.